I've always had a bias through my whole career that leadership is a set of skills that can be taught.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily differentiate like extraordinary leaders from great leaders, but almost anyone can develop the skills to be good at the job. I think the role has changed. I mean, certainly during COVID and hybrid work and all the things that have happened in the world around us, and employees expect companies to care about them now. I mean, they don't see the separation between their personal life and work. And during COVID, all that went away anyway. And that piece of it hasn't really shifted. Like, people expect the company to care about them. They expect their company to care about what their needs are, wants are. And so things are evolving. And so managers and their own skills have to change and evolve as well.
Hey, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Nice to seeing you. I feel like you got the gold medal for the most organized bookshelf for the show. I feel like if you take away anything from this conversation, is that you got. What's your favorite book? I'm just going straight in with that question.
You know, these days I'm more podcast than book, just because it's
okay.
And I love the podcast Acquired.
Nice.
I just think the stories, the hosts are amazing. So it's been one of my favorites.
Yeah. Is that also for convenience as well? So you can like consume on the move?
I'm usually like walking the dog or doing something else while doing
That's kind of how I got into it as well. Like, I had an hour commute every day and I'll just listen on the way there and the way back. And then the same thing if I'm in the gym. Like, I'm a strange person. Like, a lot of people are like, you listen to podcasts in the gym? Like, for me, it works. I don't need the music all the time. Like, kind of a sad one, but I also have a speaker in the shower, and I listen to podcasts in the shower. So my wife's like, hey, can't you just, so in the morning, in the evening, it's just never ending. But like, I have like do you know like Blinkist? Have you heard that before?
Yeah.
Where it condenses like a whole book into like 10 minutes. So I'm obsessed with that right now. Like, it's the easy way to just like actionable parts of the books that you can go and implement straight away. And then I go to the work next day and I'm like, let's go straight in to implement it as well. As much as every Monday my team's like, oh my god, what's Chris going to bring in?
Exactly. What did he read
the new idea? But before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit more about you personally and sort of the journey to where we are now at Databricks.
Yeah, I have kind of a different background. I started actually as a clinical psychologist, and actually was like 12 the first time I said I wanted to be a psychologist.
Really? What did your psychologist say about that?
My psychologist, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah.
But I was always kind of the person that people came to with their problems. So somehow I interpreted that as being, that was my destiny.
Wow.
But I went straight through university, 2 masters, a PhD, all in psychology, and then got to the end and realized that I didn't actually want to be a therapist. And so I kind of fell into HR after that and really fell in love with it, to be honest. I loved the variety of the work and the fact that it was so solution focused. And so I had a series of jobs where I came in as the HR leader long after the company needed to have the people function stood up, and was always the one to kind of build it from the ground up. And that, I actually went to Workday prior to Databricks through an acquisition, and then had a girlfriend that joined Databricks. And so I had learned a lot about the company through her experience, all of which were positive. And then she shared with me that they were looking for a new HR leader. And I wasn't interested. I was actually going to take some time off after my Workday experience. Yeah. And then as she was describing to me that they couldn't find somebody that they liked, I had offered to talk to the CEO to help with the search and figure out, if I could help him network. And then I met Ali Ghatzi, our CEO, and I really was like blown away by the conversation. And it was everything from like these 7 academics who took this crazy leap of faith to start a company, all the way through. He had this unbelievable clarity of vision around the kind of company he wanted to build. And I thought it was extraordinary. So 3 weeks later, I accepted a job. And when I started at Databricks, we were just 500 people. So quite small. And it was exactly the same situation where there was like almost nothing on the HR side. And I thought, it was an amazing opportunity to once again build it from the ground up, but at a different pace and scale than what I had seen before, because we were growing well over 100% and
Hmm.
have actually almost every year over the 6 years that I've been here.
Wow.
So it's been an amazing journey. I probably learned more here in the last 6 years than I have in the 20 before that, just because of the growth uh, over that time period.
Sometimes life works like that, right? It just puts things in front of you and opportunities when you least expect it, you know?
It's so
And
true.
the combination of all of that experience that you had prepared you for that moment, you know?
It's so true. I think it's so true. And sometimes when you come into an organization, you don't really know what the trajectory is going to be. And this has been certainly an extraordinary experience. And I feel really blessed to have been a part of getting to build this amazing company.
Yeah. Tell everyone a little bit more about the company in case they aren't aware of Databricks.
Yeah, Databricks, it's in the AI data space. And it's kind of, I would say, in a class of one, to be honest, that we've been in the AI space for over 10 years, but certainly the market opportunities become huge. And so now we have about 8,000 employees
Wow.
and still growing 60% year over year on top of over a $2 billion revenue number. And so it's been an extraordinary ride and an adventure, to be honest. So, and we're a really interesting company because we still have 5 active founders with
That's
the
so
founders.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it definitely creates a really unique environment in terms of the culture and how decisions are made. And I'm sure we can get into some of that over the next hour, but it's definitely has created a really unique environment there.
Yeah. Is one of them the CEO, or do they have like they equal work? Like how do they navigate that?
Yeah. So one of the CEO,
Yeah.
Ali God's, and he actually was not the original CEO. One of the other founders was, but has been in the CEO seat for a number of years. And then there's still 4 active founders,
Amazing.
all of whom are in, really critical, influential positions in their own right. But they very much support Ali in all of the sort of thinking about strategy, people, you name it. They have an incredible influence on the direction of the company
Yeah.
still.
One of the things I'm really interested to hear from you is how, and you sounds like you've done this multiple times. How have you maintained the company culture whilst hyperscaling? Right, because it's
Yeah,
tough to keep that special. What made the business successful as you grow so fast? It's difficult to keep that. You know.
it's so true. Um, I'll answer in 2 ways. One is just a little bit about how we defined our culture principles at Databricks, which was in kind of a unique way.
Okay.
And so the last time we sort of revisited them was coming out of COVID because we had hired thousands of people during that time, all of whom were working from home. And so myself and the founders came together and we basically did sort of a study of the behavior of people who had been really successful at Databricks and also those who had struggled. And then we took that data and correlated it back to times when we'd done our most important work, whether that was for customers or innovation in the product. And so our culture principles are just a description of the behavior of people who perform really well here. And if you think about what culture is, it's just a set of behavioral norms in a company. And so ours is very descriptive about what's important. And so because of that, it's allowed us to be really intentional about how we've scaled culture and that we think about it as a teaching mechanism to help people understand what's important here and what that looks like in action. And our biggest bet we've made has been through our leaders because for the most part we're largely at home still, and so we need the leaders to like really understand what's important in terms of our culture, our leadership principles as well, and then they're sort of the translator for how to bring that to life.
Yeah,
And
of
then we've
course.
also been really intentional about like how do we bring these mechanisms to life in the way that we lead as a executive team and in the transparency that we provide for the employees. And we have a number of things that we do to help make sure that the culture principles are really activated in every part of the employee experience here.
What are some of those key principles that popped up during the conversations?
Yeah, it was very clear. And sometimes there's some tension between some of them, but I think that certainly customer obsession was the first and foremost And we think of it differently
Yeah, what does
because
that mean? Yeah, because when you
yeah,
say customer accept, that means different things in different people that I speak to. It
it's
means something different for us here at HR Leaders.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And it's funny because whenever I say that or I explain it to employees, there isn't a company that's going to be like, we don't care about our customers. So of course it's critical. But for us, it means, we're often doing things that have never been done before because we're in such an innovative space. And so for us, it was always more like customers led the way, and that we needed to deeply understand their needs so that we could help understand how to best meet them. And so for us, that's been sort of our orientation around it. It's really around that partnership and understanding their needs so that we could understand how to best, drive innovation within the product and in the way that we provide our services to them. So that's been really critical for us. And we often have to explain that because, all companies say that customers are important, but we need our employees to understand exactly why it's important here. But the other ones, they sort of come from our academic roots because our founders were all PhDs from Berkeley. And so there is a sense of something that's different here. And so things like first principles thinking and being truth seeking are really an important part of how people operate successfully at Databricks. And oftentimes we have to kind of teach them what that means here. If they aren't used to thinking from first principles, or truth seeking can mean a lot of different things, but here it means transparency and also being really data driven in the way we do our work. And so
Yeah.
we have to help them understand exactly what that looks like.
How do you? Firstly, I love that, and I love. How do you translate that into action? Right? How do you translate those principles into those showing up in the flow of work? That's showing up in the product. That's showing up in the way your managers lead in the business. How have you translated that, especially when you've got a hybrid team and people operating remotely? That makes it a little bit more challenging to do
For
that as
sure.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you two examples. So, one is in terms of truth seeking, the way we role model that in the organization is that there is an unbelievable amount of transparency in the way we operate as a team. And so things like we hold an all hands meeting for the entire company every week. But for that meeting, any employee at any time can ask a question. They're not curated, they're visible for all. All questions get answered. And so it just role models the fact that like we're a
You
really
do that
open
every
environment
single week.
every week.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we also,
How long you been doing that for every week?
I've been pretty much since I got here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's just about keeping people connected to the
Yeah.
mission, vision, to the product, to our customers. And another example is like we use Slack as an organization, but we have a Ask Me Anything CEO Slack channel. And any
Oh,
person in the
that's
company
cool.
a question anytime, he answers them all the same day. And there's no question that's off the table. And so it's just kind of an indication of like how we want to operate, that we
Does
want
that
as long.
go? Does the reply and the question? Does the reply appear to everyone?
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. That's.
Yeah.
How do you
And
organize?
so
How do you organize the questions?
they
Like,
just come as people ask them.
and then
Yeah,
it's just that transparent. He just replies back in the feed, and everyone in the feed can just see it.
exactly.
That's really radical transparency right there.
Yeah. And it's but that's kind of who we are. And that's our employees now kind of expect it. And we want them to, because our belief is like the more context they have, the better decisions they'll
Do you
make.
have you had uncomfortable conversation in there though? Because it's always not always going to be, transparency comes both ways. It's not always going to be positive, right?
Yeah,
It's going
no,
to
that's
come with
definitely
sharing,
true.
hey, this is what we can do, and by the way, this is what we can't do and why, right? So
Yeah, for
have you
sure.
had that as well?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. I mean, if you're going to have that kind of radical transparency, you're going to have both sides of the equation
Good.
for sure.
Yeah,
But
I love that.
I think that it's to me like transparency equals trust,
Yeah,
and the
it
outcome of
starts with
this,
trust. Yeah,
yeah, for sure. And when we do our engagement survey every year, I mean, it's the number one thing that comes out is that the amount of like trust and respect people have for the executive team, and it's not that they have to always like what's said, but they do know they're going to get the truth.
yeah. No, I love that. Like, I one of my friends, Lindsay Bridges. If you're listening, Lindsay, hey, she's a HR exec over at DHL, and she started a podcast. And on the podcast, the sometimes there's not always positive conversations, right?
Yeah.
And I remember speaking to someone who worked there and they said that one of the reasons they joined is they had heard one of the podcasts because they make them publicly available, and she said that I want to work at a company like that, and
Oh,
that
I
was the
love.
reason they applied to join,
Yeah,
because the radical transparency, not just doing a podcast episode about every great thing, but also being transparent in the challenges, because that's real right there. Like,
I
that's
think that's exactly
it
right.
says a lot about
I
an
mean,
organization.
it's so true. It's probably the number one thing I hear from employees when they join is that they often say the same 8 words to me, which is I've never worked at a company like Databricks. And
Hmm.
that's the first thing that they always mention is like, you just don't know what's going to come out of Ali's mouth, or you don't know what questions people are going to ask, but somehow there's this incredible like respect that comes out of it.
Yeah,
And I do think it's something that's really special about the experience
I love
here.
that. So you got the all hands meetings, you got the Ask Me Anything Slack channel. Any other areas in terms of like the training and upskilling side?
Yeah, I mean, so those are just examples of kind of how we role model
I
that.
love that.
We, one of the things that's been like a passion project for me here is that we created a leadership development program called Leadershift. And it's really custom made, and we think of it as leaders teaching leaders.
Hmm.
And the idea behind it is that we're trying to help leaders understand how to operate under years of extended hypergrowth. It's very different. And because the context is always changing. And so, how you have to think about talent on your team, how you have to think about, constant change and evolution. And, it's something that we've really put a lot of time and investment in. There's very little in it about sort of standard leadership skills, and it's really custom made to help leaders be successful here. And so that's been a big investment that we've made in terms of how to help leaders feel supported when they're in an environment that's growing and changing all the time.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's interesting because you want to maintain what the DNA of what makes a business special, but there's also, the saying of what got us here won't get us there.
For
so,
sure.
so you
Exactly.
need to be evolving. What's the structure of that? How does it work in terms
Yeah,
of the
there's
program?
actually, yeah, there's 3 levels of it. So the first is for new managers.
Hmm.
So we do a separate course for them to help them understand the shift into leadership. There's a annual conference that we do for all leaders across the world, where they go through, regardless of level, they go through a program, and that's really in many ways taught by our founders about our culture, our leadership essentials, and kind of how to work in this context. And then we have a program for our more senior leaders and highest potential leaders that is an additional investment in them as well.
Nice.
That's a combination of both classroom and coaching
Is that
experiences.
all in house, or you bring in external coaches?
We only use external for the senior leader program, but everything else is custom made.
Nice.
And the program's developed by my team, but it's very much taught by a combination of my team as well as the founders of the
Great.
company.
Love that.
Yeah.
And have you found that any challenges around scaling that? Because that sometimes can be a challenge, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's such an important investment for us. So it has definitely been an effort to scale it, but
Hmm.
this year we took it to 22 cities around the world.
Wow.
And, the in-person experience, I think, is really important.
And
And
that,
so
and
it's
that is
just,
and that is the investment, and that's where a lot of companies are cutting,
yeah,
right? Like you're like, it's not cheap to get to be in 22 different countries and get the leaders together. But I agree with you, you can't replace that.
and the thing is that we ask so much of our leaders. I mean, when I think about, some of the most common things that I hear myself say, that regardless of what's going on, whether it's an external political issue or, something internally, the most common thing we say is like, please talk to your manager. And so on the other side of that, you have to support them and enable them to understand, what's expected of them and, and how they should be leading their teams. And so to me, like it's probably the most important investment we make each year is doing this conference and helping the leaders understand what success looks like.
Love that, and it's also, there's something to be said that people don't talk about enough, in my opinion, is the relationships and the bond that they build face to face
For sure.
outside of the classroom or the workshop or the sessions, that is, and the trust that's built there, and the cross pollination of diversity of thought and perspective, and you're probably meeting people in different departments and part of the organizations you'd never normally meet. That in itself is just as valuable, even if in my opinion, if not more, than the training itself, because they
It's
now
so
have
true.
that group around them and they can build that trust and the relationships with each
It's
other.
so true. And one of the things that's been so interesting about being in this kind of extended period of hyper growth is that there are not very many people that understand what you're going through. And so when you get together
Yeah.
with leaders from other departments or other cities, that there is this kind of connection automatically that happens of like, oh, actually, regardless of the fact that I'm in HR or you're in engineering, like we're still actually facing a lot of the same leadership challenges. And so creating those connections and helping them understand that they have support inherently
Yeah.
in the community within the company has been really powerful.
Yeah, it's nice to know you're not alone. You know,
You're not alone.
even that in itself can be
Yeah,
huge, to have
exactly.
someone to lean on. I remember like when I was a manager early, 20 years ago, it was kind of pretty lonely. I was just kind of just thrusted into that role just because I was a high performing sales executive. Doesn't mean I'm going to be a good manager. And there was no network or no training, and it was just like, yeah, I'm kind of drowning right now, and I don't know
Yeah.
what to and I don't know what to, I don't know what to do. I was reading all the manager books that I could, but it didn't really help me that much, because I was like,
Yeah.
is this normal is it normal to be this overwhelmed? Right. As
Sure.
well. So just having that group around you is huge. I love to talk more about the leading with first principles. So I first came across that through people like Elon Musk, who talks about that a lot in any interviews you hear, or people like Ray Dalio and many others. And it's something that I think is really interesting, but maybe people listening aren't as aware of that. Could you talk about what it is and what does it mean to you, and also how do you then apply that in Databricks?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, to me, the simplest way I think about it is from two standpoints. One is just kind of starting with why. And then the other one is that it's really about operating in context. And, we hire, I think, the best and brightest in every role. That's part of our how we think about hiring for the organization. And I think there's always this interesting contrast but with the fact that we hire the best and brightest, and then we actually ask them to like set aside everything they've ever known and only think in context about
Yeah.
what we need at Databricks. And
Yeah.
it's hard for people. I mean, I made the same mistake when I first joined. I was building our like review process for the first time. And I just took like a mashup of other best practices that I thought might work. I never talked to anybody about it. I just figured, I'm the expert. And
Yeah.
so, what I think will work well here. And of course it didn't work at all. And so I had to like take a step back and really start asking questions about what we're trying to accomplish, what was important here, how did we think about talent? And those are kind of the way that we think about first principles. Like what problem are we trying to solve? And then coming up with with a solution that's uniquely suited for Databricks. And that's going to look very different than what might work great at other organizations. And that to me is the art of it, is trying, and also the fun, to be honest. That's the creativity and building something that's uniquely suited for our company and also is what makes us special.
Hmm. But practically, how do you bring that to life? Because that's the challenge, right? Like,
Yeah,
how do you embed that in the culture? Because it is quite different, a way of
it is.
thinking
I know.
as well.
I mean, I think there's a few things that we think about. One is, as I talked about with the leaders, like helping them understand what it means so that they can help their employees operate that
Hmm.
way. And then we do a lot of, sort of talking about it within the organization. And also, whether it's helpful or not, but people learn it pretty quickly
Yeah.
because when they start to come in with like whatever worked at their last company, it doesn't work. And so they learn quickly to, take a step back and to operate, from first principles and to start asking about what's best for our company, what's going to support our vision and mission, et cetera. So I think, we don't want it to be that you learn the hard way, but if you don't learn it through, sort of your leadership in your own function or through the way that we talk about it as an organization, people will typically learn it like I did, which is like, okay, you don't have to tell me twice. I got it the first time I
Yeah.
did
But
it
like you said
correctly.
though, it's part of the language of the business. And
For
I'm
sure.
so like, I mean, even just in me and you speaking, I can tell that in meetings, in conversations, that's you're giving people the language to then have the conversation,
For
right?
sure.
Right, and they understand. Okay, that's what that means.
That's
So,
right.
so they'll pick it up pretty quickly because it's part of
That's
the
right.
DNA of the way the business operates, right? And I'm
Exactly.
sure that's going to show up in those all hands meetings, going to show up in one-to-one meetings, and throughout the business
That's right.
as well. So it's super interesting. That kind of like, have you brought in that those same principles into your own team, and if
Oh,
so, how has that shaped your HR team?
yeah. I mean, you have to here because there is no lift and shift from other companies. And so the context of whatever you think is the right solution probably isn't. And so first and foremost, one of the things that we talk about in the mission for the people function is that we're building for something that's uniquely suited for Databricks. I mean, that's in our mission statement.
Oh,
So that people
really? Wow.
understand that, we're going to build for what's best for the company. And so it starts there. But in everything we're doing, we're always asking, like, are we operating from first principles? We're asking those questions about why we're doing it this way or why not other ways that might be,
Can you give me an
more.
example of like a time where you thought about something and then actually after reflecting on it through that lens said, actually, we're going to go this direction
Yeah, oh, it
instead?
happens every day here. The, honestly. But even, I'll give you an example of, when we think about our talent philosophy, I mean, similar to Amazon, we use the term raise the bar, although it
Yeah.
isn't exactly translated the way it is there, but we use the same terminology. And so we've had to really think about, like, what does it mean to be a bar raising leader? And how do we explain that? And then what are the expectations? And how do we build that into all of our processes, whether it's career ladders or reviews or promotion evaluations, things like that. But we've gone a lot of different directions with it. We started using different language originally and testing that and then realizing that we weren't in exactly the right place. And some of it comes from starting to use it. And like if the terminology you're using doesn't take hold,
Yeah.
you're probably not, not in the right place with it. And so, it just requires a lot of agility. And, it's probably one of the things I've learned the most in working in this environment over this time period is like, look, change is constant. I mean, I actually say to my team all the time, it's like, look, things are in three states. They're either, you know, breaking, they're about to break, or they're broken, whatever we built before. And so you have to be open to just understanding like things are always going to evolve. And
Yeah.
it requires you to always be asking those questions along the way. There is no constant state here.
How did that how did you adapt to this personally? Because it couldn't have been easy because it's quite a big shift maybe from the other companies that you worked in yourself.
You know,
Was it very much
yeah,
learning the hard way or like
I think, I think probably a couple of things. I mean, I love the ambiguity of being in a startup. I know 8,000 people isn't really a startup anymore, but
yeah.
that's my whole background. And so I think for me, like I was always comfortable in kind of the grayness of life, and I am, absolutely fine in that state. And so that's probably helped me personally. But the other one is just like I think it takes a lot of humility to be in a place where things, may look like they're broken. I sometimes I think about like leaders that do well here can build from broken pieces because that's a lot of what it is when you're growing at this pace. Like something's always going to be, in a state of evolution, and whatever state it was in before probably isn't going to scale at the pace we need it
Yeah.
to.
I didn't realize how important that skill was until probably years into my career because in my last company I was a sales manager and there was like 15 sales managers and like a couple of hundred sales executives and I became for some reason the person that when someone was having challenges and the company was thinking about letting that employee go, they would give them one more chance on my team. And it became like this sort of like Chris is Chris and his team and his training will be like the last thing, and a lot of them we turned them around. In fact, there's a couple of people like Omri, who's if he's I don't know if he's ever going to listen to this, but he was someone that the business is about to let go. He'd been struggling in sales for almost like 6 months, and actually ended up being the number one salesperson in the company's history a few months later. And all that was holding him back is that no one actually had taken the chance to say, "Are you okay?" You
Mhm.
know, because I'm looking at your KPIs and they're through the roof, but there's no sales. So there's
Yeah,
something not matching here. You're doing the most
yeah,
calls, the most pitches, all the work, but then there's no deals, right? So I was like, there's something wrong because it's not work ethic
right.
as well. And what I realized was he was having some personal challenges outside of the
Mhm.
organization, which was leading to a lack of confidence of just asking for the deal. So he
Right.
was doing all of this work, right, and just not asking for the deal, right? So we wrote a pitch for him, gave him some training, and I was like, listen, no matter how you feel, right, like, and after obviously helping support him outside the business, but I want you just to read this script and just, even if it feels hard to ask the question, for the deal, I want you to just do it, and it game changer,
That's love.
literally. And you can see the confidence in him grow. And he became a manager in the business and left and actually started his own business who competed with us,
Yeah.
right?
The gift keeps on giving.
Yeah, right. And I tell you that story not to like pat myself on the back, but I used to see that at the time as like, oh, this is really frustrating. I'm getting all these people coming to my team, but I realized that to your point earlier, like that's probably now whenever we're in chaos or things aren't going well, it's kind of like taught me to look at what is the root cause of it and look
Mm.
kind of a little bit deeper. And whereas before I just didn't do that as well, and it kind of built a level of resilience in us and the team and curiosity
Yeah.
that it isn't always what it seems on the surface level. And if you just dig a few layers deeper, you'll be amazed at what you find, if that makes sense. I probably didn't say that really well, but that's what I
Well,
was trying to get at.
no, I think that's absolutely right. And I do think that kind of intellectual curiosity is really important. And
Yeah,
that for people that need to feel sort of mastery over things and they're looking for things to get into some kind of static state, they would never be comfortable here. And it's that constant sort of orientation towards continuous improvement and the curiosity
it's
that
interesting.
to build is, I think, part of what makes, Bricksters, that's what we call our employees, really
Breaksters,
successful.
of course you do. I should have asked you that earlier. I knew there's going to be a name. So
That's
Shane,
what you know.
so my co-founder Shane's the opposite of what you're describing. So he is the solid foundation structure, you know, and I am the person going off into the headwind, breaking things, constantly trying to challenge the status quo. So we
I
have a
love
good
that.
balance
Yeah, that's
of that because
perfect.
I think if we were all me, it would just be chaos, and if it was all Shane, we'd be probably be out of business because we haven't really evolved and
Yeah.
innovated as well. So we're very lucky that we have each other from that perspective as well, which is really interesting. You made me think about that. Um, how do you feel about? Sorry. How do you leverage? You're in AI, right? You're like leading the way as a business. How are you
Right.
then using that internally? Because you're servicing customers externally. I'm sure you're leveraging those tools internally. Yeah, I'd
I'm
love to learn a
sure.
bit more about that. It must be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, we use it in every function in the business. I'll give you an example from my own team. So we have our own HR data lake, and we one of the things that's been really important for us since we've been in this case extended hypergrowth is thinking about how we build the healthiest organizations. And and that includes things like we want a healthy level of non-regretted attrition. We want to ensure that we're taking care of our top performers. And so we built I'll talk about non-regretted attrition. We built a predictive model so that we could predict basically down to the person each quarter exactly where we were going to land
Wow.
in terms of people that might leave the organization. And then we actually feed that data back into our TA function so that they have that, and they're responsible for meeting a headcount number with the highest level of quality. So the ability to understand exactly where that moving target is going to land for them has allowed us to be able to create this kind of closed loop process from the data to meet our headcount numbers pretty much to the number each quarter. And so it's been really helpful to have that kind of accuracy and precision around this. And then it allows both teams to be successful. in terms of the organization around us, and then my TA team in terms of meeting their responsibilities to the
Wow.
business.
I feel like we could do a whole show on this, so I'm trying my best not to ask so many questions. It's like just blew my. I'm actually, I'm not sure if you've seen, but I'm doing a weekly global well-being series, a podcast. Yeah, so every week I interviewed every week for the last 12 weeks I've interviewed a global head of well-being. So I've had like, Microsoft, Unilever, you name it, their global heads of well-being sharing case studies every single week. We post them on LinkedIn every week. So this is really close to me, to my heart, as well. And where do I even start? You just opened my mind with so many questions. What are some of the data sources that you're drawing the insights from?
Yeah,
That's the first question of many.
yeah. And so it's a combination of things like our performance review data,
Hmm.
we use HR Acuity for performance management cases, our workday data. So it's a combination of multiple factors that come into our data lake that help us, that feed the model that we're
Wow.
using.
Do you have anything like any well-being solutions or partners, like a well hub or any other platforms like that, like employee
Yeah,
assistance programs, things like that?
yeah, we use Modern Health, and
Modern
then
Health
we
is
all
great. Yeah.
Modern Health is great. And then, but we also are really, we try to be very supportive. So we have like a very generous fitness stipend for employees along with that. And as well as employees get a certain amount of money each year for their own employee development. So they
Hmm.
can pursue things that are of interest to them. And so it's a combination of multiple factors. So some programmatic and some
Love that.
that are kind of financial support to help employees be their
Yeah.
best version.
Must be great for your team then. So are you now in a place where you've got enough data to start? Obviously, you mentioned the predictive side, but to start putting in place some preventative measures, as because I think a lot of companies when they think about well-being, it's kind of just reacting rather than
Yeah,
preventing, if that makes sense.
I think
Kind of
that's
just putting like a band-aid on the problem as opposed to trying to solve the root cause early
Yeah,
on.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, and we can see certain factors that are likely to cause attrition, whether it's, uh, multiple manager changes or other factors. But yeah, it's not, I mean, you can start to see the patterns of what does contribute to regretted attrition. So we also look at that as well.
Yeah. What would you say is the number one sort of activity or practice you put in place from well-being perspective that's had the most impact over the years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, to be honest, I think the thing that has helped employees the most has been rather than something that's programmatic, because we do offer kind of the same things that other companies offer, whether it's, Modern Health or an EAP of some form or fitness benefits like that. Like, I don't think those are really differentiators.
Hmm.
To me, the thing that helps support employees the most is really how you lead the organization.
Yeah.
You're getting the support they need. And, I always come down to like, there's two things that people really want at work. One is that they want to feel like they're making an impact, and the other one is that they want to, care about and respect the people that they work with.
Yeah.
And so we try to focus on those factors. And of course, you have to do the others. They're kind of necessary, but not sufficient. But when you really think about what makes people, do their best work, it really comes down to those factors. And if those pieces are in the right place and they have the other kind of necessary support, then that's typically when you see people do really extraordinary work.
Yeah. I think you're 100% right, and the data supports it. Right, the relationship with the managers, the most important differentiator or predictor of well-being, because that's
Yeah.
who they're interacting with. And we all know what it's like to have a manager that sucks, right? We've all hopefully, unfortunately, I've had a few. I don't know if you've had a few over the years, right? So like, we all know what that feels like, right? So I love the fact that even from the beginning of this conversation, that you started with, Chris, the importance of the investment in our managers and our leaders. That's the
I
first thing.
mean,
That's the first thing that stood out to me.
for
Uh,
sure. And if you think about the other side of what you just said, I mean, I think, everyone's had a manager that they didn't feel like was a good fit for them or didn't get the support they needed. And then if you flip the switch, I mean, if you think about the managers you've had that have really invested in you, taken chances on you, and helped you be successful, I mean, they're game changers. And so that's what we want to create is those managers across the company that can help employees feel like they're doing their best work.
yeah. And to your point, I do believe that a lot of those managers I had just didn't have the investment.
Yeah.
and didn't have the support that they needed. Do I think that they wanted to do that and wanting to make? I don't believe anyone wakes up in the morning wanting to. I feel like they just don't have the support or skills or
Right.
that they need to do that. So it goes both ways. You can't expect
No,
people
I
just
think
to
that's right.
turn up and all of a sudden understand how to be an incredible leader. That's something that takes time. And
Yeah,
and
it's
some
it's
some are more naturally good at it than others and kind of drift away, and some are not, right? Like
sure,
as well. So I do think that that's a big, and companies have to take ownership of that.
for sure.
And
And I,
and and it's different now, right? What it means to lead now has also changed dramatically with hybrid working and well-being and
for
the
sure.
resilience requirement that you need. If you look at the leadership competencies from when I was a manager, none of them are in the list of the top five, right? Of what you
So
needed
true.
to be
No, it's
no one
true.
said leading with empathy was going to be really important to me when
Yeah,
I was growing, when I was when I was a manager
exactly.
as
It's
well.
so true. And I mean, I've always had a bias through my whole career that leadership is a set of skills that can be taught.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily differentiate like extraordinary leaders from great leaders, but almost anyone can develop the skills to be good at the job. And like you said, I think the role has changed. I mean, certainly during COVID and, hybrid work and all the things that have happened in the world around us, and employees expect companies to care about them now. I mean,
Mm.
they don't see the separation between their personal life and work. And during COVID, all that went away anyway. And that piece of it hasn't really shifted. Like people expect the company to care about them. They expect their company to care about what their needs are, wants are. And so things are evolving. And so managers and their own skills have to change and evolve as well.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like even in interviews that I'm having now, the type of questions I'm getting are so different.
Oh, really?
Like salary is not the number one question anymore. It's around the culture, the well-being.
Mm.
Our focus on creating that a workplace that where they feel like they can really belong.
Yeah.
And be part of that. And they're not, and also the flexibility, of course, is another huge part of the interview process now. The flexibility is that's no
Mm.
longer a nice to have. if you
Yeah.
if it's and it's not, I don't even like the work life balance, and I like for me it's blend.
Yeah.
I don't think because balance says that you have to be on one end or the other. All right,
Right.
like it feels like a scale almost. Whereas I feel like it's blend. My I go home, I spend time with my daughter, then I go back to work, and it's all
Yeah,
one.
it's all intermixed together
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. I'm not jumping from one to the other. It's a
Right.
blend of both, and that in itself, fundamentally, you have to change your processes, the
For
way you
sure.
lead, your culture, everything. In the way you upskill, reskill, reward people, it's forcing companies to radically rethink everything almost
Yeah, I think that's exactly
on
right.
the ground upwards. Listen, I could talk to you forever, but I know you got to go at some point. Before I let you go, what would be your parting piece of advice for those HR leaders of tomorrow that are going to be sitting in your seat one day? What did you wish you knew
You
that
know,
you know now?
I think the thing that I think the most about now is just how to operate effectively at all the floors of the building. You have to work at different altitudes all the time. And so the ability to flex between having the most strategic conversations to being really, hands-on in the work when needed is something that I think is really important. And the ability to context switch between that is, I think, for people who are in this role, one of the things that is a really important skill set to have and is the differentiator between, whether people can really excel in the role or struggle in it. So that would be my advice is just, working on that skill of being able to work at different altitudes as quickly as possible is something that
I love
I would
that.
encourage you into.
Yeah, I try and think of that sometimes, and even talk to my wife actually, really strangely through this lens of sprints as well. So like I'll
Mm,
let my wife know, hey, I'm in a sprint right now.
I
So
love
the next few
that.
weeks are going to be a little bit crazy, and then we kind of like adjust with our family and our daughter, like, and it's like a conversation,
Yeah,
and kind of
great.
similar to what you're trying to say, like I'm with different altitudes and different places, but
Yeah,
being able to communicate that is also important to your
I think,
team, to your partner, whoever that may be.
yeah,
I didn't do that in the past. Sometimes I sort of just suffered in silence,
yeah.
and there's no and they didn't know why, right? Or I even personally didn't know what altitude I was at certain points, if that even
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, it does. It makes perfect sense. And I love that concept of like working in sprints because
Yeah.
that that's life. And
Something my
sometimes
coach helped me out a lot. He was like, Chris, you have to know when you are in a sprint and you're not. And you also need to adjust your life, because I would burn out, I would, stop sleeping. I would stop exercising, not start, eating unhealthy, then mess up my sleep. And I'm like, just, it's not sustainable. So knowing that, hey, I'm going to be in the sprint, and now I got to prepare myself for it. And knowing that if it's a continuous sprint, it's no longer a sprint. There's something wrong.
yeah, that's
so,
exactly right.
so yeah, I fooled myself into I'm in a sprint, whereas I'm actually in a crisis.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah,
right.
I love that advice. Well, listen, where can people connect with you if they want to reach out and say hi? LinkedIn, probably.
Yeah. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn and yeah, happy to connect.
Amazing. Well, listen, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. I love the journey. I don't know how long you can keep calling yourself a startup for.
I'm not giving up on it, but
Yeah.
I appreciate you having me and really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, it
So,
was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
okay, we'll talk soon.